2 days ago, I found an old voicemail from my husband. He wasn't just calling. I could hear the tension in his voice, the desperation I hadn't heard in years. Then, that same night, I walked quietly into my daughter's room and whispered, "What are you hiding from me?" The air felt thick and suffocating, like a storm ready to break inside my chest. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, I'm 73 years old, and for most of my life I lived in the restless chaos of a Brooklyn brownstone where love was tangled with silence. Every morning, I woke before dawn. The smell of strong coffee would mix with the faint scent of the city's rain that somehow always found its way through our old windows. I would shuffle down the creaking wooden stairs in my worn slippers, the same burgundy ones I'd had for 15 years. My husband David never noticed when I replaced them. He never noticed much about me anymore. I would prepare breakfast for my family, hoping for a smile, an embrace, something that would remind me I mattered. The kitchen was my sanctuary and my prison. Yellow walls that had once felt cheerful now seemed to mock me with their brightness. I'd crack eggs into the cast iron pan, watching them sizzle, waiting for footsteps that rarely came. The bacon would snap and pop, filling the silence that had become my constant companion. But the house stayed cold, no matter how high I turned the thermostat. My husband David was always on his phone, his voice low and urgent as he paced the living room, talking about investments and opportunities that never seemed to pan out. His gray hair was perfectly combed, his suit pressed, but his eyes were distant, calculating. When he looked at me, it felt like he was looking through me, as if I were a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of noticing. My daughter Lila would retreat behind closed doors, the sound of her bedroom lock clicking shut like a small knife in my heart. She was 38 years old, living in our house again after her third divorce, but she treated me like I was the intruder. Her once bright smile had faded into something guarded and secretive. She moved through our home like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, mumbling responses to my questions about her day. That morning, when a call from David lit up my phone screen, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he wanted to talk about something other than money. Maybe he remembered it was almost our 40th wedding anniversary. My fingers trembled slightly as I answered, pressing the cool phone to my ear. "Eleanor," his voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and impatient. "I need you to transfer $5,000 from your savings account. There's an opportunity with Bitcoin that could change everything for us. Not hello, not how are you. Just a demand wrapped in false promises." That hope died as quickly as it had sparked. I hung up without saying goodbye and walked slowly up those same creaking stairs. The banister was smooth under my palm, worn down by decades of my touch, my family's touch, countless moments of coming and going. But today, it felt different. Cold. I found Lila's bedroom door locked, and the subtle scent of cigarette smoke drifted underneath. She'd promised she quit smoking years ago, another lie in a house built on them. I knocked softly, my knuckles barely making a sound against the wood. "Lila? Sweetheart?" Silence. I tried the handle. Locked. The reality hit me like the cold October wind off the Hudson River. Love was nowhere in sight. I was 73 years old, standing in my own home, feeling like a stranger begging for scraps of attention from the two people who were supposed to love me most. Let me tell you about the years that brought me to this moment. The countless nights I stayed awake, nursing David through his failed business ventures. His latest obsession was cryptocurrency. He'd bought Bitcoin when it was high, sold when it was low, then borrowed money to buy more. Our savings account had become his personal casino fund, and I was the house that always lost. I remember holding him when his first company went under. He was 55 then, younger, still full of dreams that glittered like fool's gold. "Eleanor, just one more week," he'd mutter, his eyes glazed with exhaustion and desperation. Just one more investment and we'll have the fortune we deserve. My money dried up covering his mistakes. The nest egg I'd built from 30 years of working as a school librarian, gone. Dollar by dollar, investment by failed investment. When he talked about the stock market, his voice would get excited, childlike almost. He'd spread papers across our kitchen table, pointing at charts and graphs I didn't understand, promising that this time would be different. But it never was. Then there were Lila's medical bills. Her asthma attacks started when she was 12 and continued well into adulthood. Thousands of dollars in emergency room visits, specialists, medications. I never complained, not once. I'd sit in those sterile hospital waiting rooms, the smell of disinfectant burning my nose, praying she'd be okay while David paced and made phone calls about business deals that couldn't wait. When Lila threw temper tantrums or slammed doors, I swallowed my pride. I told myself it was grief, stress, the weight of her failed marriages. She needs understanding, I would whisper to myself while scrubbing dishes alone after another silent dinner. She needs her mother. I even forgave the time David forgot my birthday completely, my 70th birthday. I'd waited all day watching the clock, listening for his car in the driveway. He came home at 11:30 that night, smelling like whiskey and other people's cigarettes. "Sorry, Eleanor," he said, not even looking at me. Client meeting ran late. Big opportunity in the renewable energy sector. Could be worth millions. Always millions just out of reach. "You'll understand when you get older," he added, as if I weren't already older, as if I weren't already understanding more than he knew. Each, "I understand," I whispered, felt like another brick in the wall separating us from each other. My voice got smaller with each passing year, until some days I wondered if I'd forgotten how to speak at all. The house filled with the sounds of other people's lives, David's phone calls, Lila's music bleeding through her bedroom walls, the television she'd watch until 3 a.m. But never the sound of conversation, never the sound of laughter shared between us, never the sound of anyone asking how my day had been. Slowly, like ice forming on a window, I began asking myself the questions that kept me awake at night. Am I just a caretaker? A wallet with legs? Or simply invisible? Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Have you ever wondered if the people you love see you as a person or just a resource to be used? The microaggressions started small. David would interrupt me when I tried to speak at family dinners. "Eleanor, let me finish," he'd say, then talk for 20 minutes about cryptocurrency trends while my words evaporated. Lila would roll her eyes when I offered advice, her expression saying what her mouth wouldn't, that I was old-fashioned, out of touch, irrelevant. Birthdays passed unnoticed. My 71st was a silent dinner alone, the only gift a text message from David that read, "Sorry, work emergency. Rain check on celebration." No rain check ever came. My 72nd was worse. No text at all. My arthritis got worse that winter, my fingers stiff and aching, especially in the mornings. I mentioned it to David once. "Maybe you should see a doctor," he said without looking up from his laptop. But when I needed a ride to the appointment, my hands too painful to grip the steering wheel safely, he was suddenly too busy with a conference call that couldn't be rescheduled. I took the bus instead, sitting next to strangers who showed me more kindness than my own husband. An elderly man helped me down the steep steps, his calloused hand steady under my elbow. "Careful there, dear," he said with a smile. A simple gesture, but it brought tears to my eyes because I couldn't remember the last time anyone had been gentle with me. The doctor prescribed medication, but David questioned the cost. "Do you really need the name brand version? The generic is just as good and half the price." My pain was worth saving $30. Then last winter, everything changed. I was putting clean sheets on Lila's bed. She'd asked me to do her laundry, again, when I found a box hidden under her mattress. Old shoebox, once white, now yellowed with age. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Letters. Dozens of them. Her handwriting, but different somehow. Anxious. Desperate. All addressed to someone named Jay. The postmark dates went back 2 years. I read one, then another, my heart sinking with each word. Jay, I can't keep lying to her. The money from her account is almost gone, but David says we need more for the investment to pay off. She trusts me completely. It's breaking my heart, but I don't know how else to help you with your gambling debts. My daughter. My sweet daughter who I'd nursed through asthma attacks and heartbreaks. She was stealing from me. Had been stealing from me for 2 years. Another letter. The Bitcoin investment David talked her into is fake. He's been funneling her money to cover his own trading losses. She has no idea how little is left in her retirement account. The room spun around me. 40 years of marriage. 38 years of motherhood. All of it built on lies that had been crumbling around me while I smiled and cooked breakfast and asked them about their days. When I confronted Lila that evening, she couldn't meet my eyes. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed defensively, still beautiful at 38, but wearing guilt like a mask. "What is this?" I asked, holding up one of the letters. Her face crumpled. "Mom, I can explain." "Explain what? How you've been stealing from me? How you and your father have been lying to me for years?" "It's not stealing," she said, but her voice was weak, unconvincing even to herself. "Dad said it was an investment, that we'd pay you back with interest." "What investment, Lila? What investment requires you to forge my signature on bank documents?" She shut me out then, her eyes going blank, her voice flat. "You wouldn't understand. You don't know how complicated things are." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten thousands of meals with my family. My hands were trembling, from arthritis, from shock, from 40 years of suppressed rage finally beginning to surface. I reached for my favorite porcelain cup, the one with tiny blue flowers that my mother had given me when I got married. My fingers fumbled. The cup slipped, crashing against the floor, shattering into dozens of pieces. The sound echoed through the quiet house like a gunshot, like the sound of my heart breaking. Tears fell like the October rain against our windows. I sat there crying, really crying, for the first time in years. Not the careful, quiet tears I'd learned to hide, but the deep, body-shaking sobs of someone who'd finally understood the truth. I was alone. Had been alone for years while living with 2 people who saw me as nothing more than a source of money and free labor. For the first time, I thought about saying no. To David's endless requests for money, to Lila's secretive demands, to the suffocating silence that had become my life. But fear clawed at me like a living thing. Loneliness was a daunting abyss, but so was the sting of disrespect. If I stood up to them, I might lose them completely. If I didn't stand up to them, I would lose myself. I gathered the broken pieces of my cup, each shard cutting into my palms. Later, I took those letters and packed them away in an old shoebox of my own, evidence of betrayal, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Then, I sat before the bathroom mirror, searching for strength in my own reflection. The woman looking back at me was 73 years old, with silver hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling when she didn't feel like smiling. But there was something new in those eyes, something that hadn't been there in years. Anger. Clean, honest anger. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of hope. Have you ever had a moment like that? When you realized that the people who claim to love you have been treating you with less respect than you'd show a stranger? I decided to confront both David and Lila, separately at first. I thought if I could make them understand my pain, they might change. I still believed in the family I thought we'd been. I was wrong. David's voice was calm but cold when I showed him the letters. He sat in his favorite chair, the leather worn smooth from years of him reading stock reports and cryptocurrency blogs. His expression didn't change as he read his daughter's confessions. "You're imagining things, Eleanor," he said finally, setting the letters aside like they were grocery store circulars. "Everything I do is for this family. The investment opportunities I've been pursuing could set us up for life." "What investment opportunities, David? Show me the account statements. Show me where our money went." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand finance. You never have. Trust me to handle this." "Trust you? You've been lying to me for years. Our retirement account is empty, isn't it?" "It's not empty. It's invested." "There's a difference." "In what? That fake Bitcoin scheme Lila wrote about?" He stood up then, all 6 feet of him towering over me, using his size to intimidate. A trick I'd seen him use in business meetings, but never on me. Until now. "Don't make me out to be the villain here, Eleanor. I've been working my ass off to build us wealth while you've been playing house and feeling sorry for yourself." Playing house, 40 years of marriage, of keeping his home, of supporting his dreams, dismissed as playing house. Lila was worse, somehow. When I confronted her in her room, the room I'd cleaned and organized for her return home, she veered between tears and cold silence. "You wouldn't understand," she kept saying, as if understanding required some special skill I'd never developed. "My situation with Jay is complicated. The gambling debts got out of hand. I didn't know what else to do. You could have told me the truth. You could have asked for help instead of stealing." "I wasn't stealing," she snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. "I was borrowing. We were going to pay you back once Dad's investments started paying off." "What investments, Lila? There are no investments. There's just lies and empty accounts and promises that will never be kept." She turned away from me then, staring out her bedroom window at the street where we'd lived for 20 years, where I'd raised her, where I'd believed we were building something lasting. "After all I've done for you," she said quietly, "how can you doubt me?" After all she'd done for me. As if living in my house rent-free while stealing my retirement money was a favor she'd been doing. The only bright spot came from an unexpected source. My eldest grandson, Matthew, Lila's son from her first marriage. He was 26, working as a nurse at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, and living in his own apartment in Park Slope. During an awkward family dinner the following week, when David and Lila were tag-teaming me with explanations and justifications, Matthew caught my eye across the table. He gave me a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. Understanding. Support. Like he knew something the rest of us were only beginning to understand. After dinner, he helped me with the dishes, something neither his mother nor his step-grandfather ever did. "Grandma," he said quietly, his hands steady as he dried the plates I washed. "Are you okay? Really okay?" It was the first time in months anyone had asked me how I was feeling and waited for a real answer. "I don't know, sweetheart. I really don't know." He nodded, as if that was exactly what he'd expected me to say. "You know you deserve better than this, right?" Those words hit me like a revelation. You deserve better than this. When was the last time anyone had told me I deserved anything? But the rest of the family dismissed my concerns and my pain with practiced ease. "Mom, you're overthinking things," became their favorite phrase, as if thinking it all was suddenly a character flaw. They used emotional blackmail like a weapon. "After all we've done for you. You're our mother. You're supposed to support us. Family sticks together no matter what." But what had they done for me? David had given me 40 years of broken promises and financial instability. Lila had given me 38 years of taking and very little giving back. Even now, in her late 30s, she expected me to do her laundry, cook her meals, and fund her mistakes. The weight of their expectations and manipulations crushed me again, making me hesitate, making me wonder if I was losing my mind after all. The city noises pressed in through our thin windows, sirens that never seemed to stop, car horns honking in traffic that never cleared, the distant sound of other people's lives being lived while mine stood still. Those sounds used to comfort me. The reminder that I lived in a city full of millions of people, millions of stories, millions of possibilities. Now they felt like mockery. Other people were living while I was just surviving. Do you know what it feels like to be gaslit by the people you love most? To have your reality questioned until you start questioning it yourself? One cold morning in October, after receiving another frantic call from David demanding money for what he called a sure-thing investment in renewable energy stocks, I did something I'd never done before. I said no. The word came out smaller than I'd intended, but it was there, clear and unmistakable. "What did you say?" David's voice through the phone was sharp with disbelief. I said no. No more money. No more investments. No more lies. The silence that followed was deafening. 40 years of marriage, and I don't think I'd ever heard David completely speechless. "Eleanor, you don't understand what you're saying. This opportunity won't wait. The stock market moves fast. I understand perfectly. I'm saying no." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking not with fear this time, but with something else. Something I'd almost forgotten. Power. The power to choose. That day, I didn't cook dinner. The kitchen stayed quiet, the stove cold. I didn't check my phone obsessively, waiting for them to come home and need something from me. I didn't fold Lila's laundry or organize David's papers or prepare the coffee for the next morning. Instead, I put on my warmest coat, navy blue wool with brass buttons, bought years ago when I still believed I deserved nice things, and walked to the East Village. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of coffee from the dozens of small shops that lined the streets. I sat on a bench by the canal, watching the water move slowly toward the harbor, carrying away the debris of the city. For the first time in years, I breathed deeply. Really breathed. The air tasted like freedom. I called a legal aid office that my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had recommended. Mrs. Chen was 82, had been widowed for 10 years, and had the sharpest mind of anyone I knew. She'd been through her own family financial drama with sons who'd tried to pressure her into signing over her house. "Eleanor," she'd told me over tea just the week before, "sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who hurt you most. Don't let them eat your future alive." By the end of that week, I had an appointment with a lawyer. Patricia Morrison, a woman about my age who specialized in elder financial abuse. Her office was small but warm, filled with plants and photographs of her grandchildren. She didn't talk down to me or dismiss my concerns. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, reviewing the bank statements I'd brought, "what's happened to you has a name. It's called financial elder abuse, and it's more common than you might think." Hearing it named made it real. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overthinking. I was being abused by my own family. We spent 2 hours going through my finances. The numbers were worse than I'd thought. My retirement account, which had once held over $200,000, was down to less than $30,000. The money I'd saved from decades of careful budgeting, gone. "Can we get any of it back?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the expression on her face. "Some of it, maybe. If we can prove the transfers were made under false pretenses or through coercion. But Mrs. Patterson, the more important question is, how do we protect what you have left?" That night, for the first time in months, I slept through till morning. No waking up at 3 a.m. worrying about money, or listening for sounds of David coming home late from whatever business meeting had kept him out. No lying awake wondering what Lila was hiding behind her locked door. The Brooklyn humidity that usually made sleeping difficult felt different somehow. Softer. Mixed with the subtle scent of something I'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Freedom. But freedom, I was about to learn, comes with a price. And my family wasn't going to let me walk away without a fight. The next family gathering was supposed to be at Lila's cramped apartment in Astoria. She'd finally moved out of our house, though she'd taken half our furniture with her. But at the last minute, she changed it to our house. "It's bigger," she said. "More comfortable for everyone. More comfortable for her to manipulate me on my own territory," was what she meant. Matthew came with her, offering me his quiet support just by being there. He sat next to me on the couch, close enough that I could feel his solidarity, but not so close that it was obvious to the others. David dominated the conversation from the moment they arrived, pacing around our living room like he was giving a boardroom presentation. He'd dressed up for the occasion, his best navy suit, the silk tie I'd given him for Christmas years ago. Playing the role of successful businessman, even though his latest investment had been in a cryptocurrency that had lost 90% of its value in 3 weeks. "Eleanor, I know you've been confused lately," he began, his tone patronizing, like he was speaking to a child. "But I need you to understand that everything I do, every decision I make, is for our future security." I'd been dreading this conversation, but now that it was happening, I felt calmer than I'd expected. I reached into the drawer of the side table where I'd placed a photograph, one of all of us taken 5 years earlier in Central Park. We were smiling, arms around each other, looking like the happy family I'd thought we were. I stood up, holding the photograph, and looked at each of them. David with his perfectly styled hair and expensive suit bought with my money. Lila with her designer handbag that had cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. Matthew watching me with careful eyes, ready to support whatever I decided to do. Then, slowly, deliberately, I tore the photograph in half. The sound of the paper ripping was loud in the quiet room. David stopped pacing. Lila's mouth fell open. Matthew nodded, just once, like he'd been waiting for me to do exactly that. "This," I said, holding up the torn pieces, "is what you've done to our family. You've ripped it apart with lies and greed and disrespect." David tried to dominate the conversation again. "Eleanor, this isn't you. We're a family. Families work through problems together." "Families," I said, my voice steady and clear, "don't steal from each other. Families don't lie about investments that don't exist. Families don't treat each other like ATM machines." Lila started crying then, the kind of manipulative tears she'd used since childhood to get out of trouble. "Mom, we were trying to help you. The economy is changing. Cryptocurrency and Bitcoin are the future. We thought if we could build up your portfolio—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than I'd intended, but it felt good. It felt powerful. Just stop lying. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the fake investment accounts. I know about all of it. The room fell into uncomfortable silence. Outside, I could hear the familiar sounds of Brooklyn evening. Kids playing in the street. Someone practicing piano in a neighboring brownstone. The distant rumble of the subway. Normal life going on while my family imploded. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me. I looked at each of them again. These people I'd loved and sacrificed for and worried about for decades. "I will no longer buy love," I said. "I will no longer accept disrespect in exchange for financial support. Respect me or lose me." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had finally caught. David's face went red, the way it did when business deals fell through. "You can't be serious. After 40 years of marriage, you're going to throw it all away over money?" "I'm not throwing anything away. You already threw it away when you decided I was worth more to you as a bank account than as a wife." Matthew spoke for the first time. "Grandma's right. What you've been doing isn't okay." Lila turned on her son with a fury I'd rarely seen from her. "Stay out of this, Matthew. You don't understand the full situation." "I understand enough. I understand that Grandma deserves to have her own money in her own accounts. I understand that lying to someone for years isn't love." That moment was chilling but pivotal. My grandson, 26 years old, showing more integrity than his mother and step-grandfather combined, setting boundaries where only shadows had lived for years. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought they'd understand, maybe not immediately but eventually, that I was serious about changing our relationship. I was wrong. Just when I thought there might be a fragile peace, when I'd started sleeping better and eating regular meals again, when I'd begun to imagine what my life might look like with boundaries and self-respect, something happened that tested everything I thought I'd learned about standing up for myself. It was a Tuesday in November. I was at the grocery store, picking up ingredients for soup, just for me, a novel concept, when my phone buzzed with a notification from Facebook. I rarely checked social media, but something made me look this time. A video had been posted on David's page, posted 3 hours earlier and already shared dozens of times by people I didn't recognize. The title read, "Family Drama: When Mental Health Affects Financial Decisions." My hands trembled as I clicked play, standing there in the produce section of Key Food with my cart half full of vegetables I'd been looking forward to cooking for myself. The video was from a holiday party last Christmas at Lila's apartment. I remembered the party. I'd felt left out and ignored for most of it, but I'd stayed because it was family. In the background, you could see me sitting alone on Lila's couch, looking lost and elderly and confused. But in the foreground, clear as day, David and Lila were laughing about something, whispering conspiratorially, their heads close together like they were sharing secrets. At one point, David pulled out his phone and showed Lila something that made her eyes go wide. Then he said, clearly audible on the video, "She'll never know the difference. By the time she figures it out, we'll have tripled the money." The person recording, I think it was Lila's friend Jennifer, had posted it as a funny family moment. She had no idea she was documenting evidence of financial fraud. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was David's caption. "My wife Eleanor is struggling with some age-related confusion and paranoia regarding our family finances. It's been difficult for all of us, especially our daughter. We're grateful for your prayers and support during this challenging time. Family first, elder care, mental health." Dozens of comments from people I'd known for years, people from our church, neighbors, colleagues from David's work, all expressing sympathy for him, all talking about how hard it must be to deal with a spouse who'd lost touch with reality. "So sorry you're going through this, David. Praying for Eleanor's mental health recovery. Have you considered professional care? My aunt went through something similar." The public nature of the betrayal was breathtaking. They weren't just stealing from me and lying to me. They were destroying my reputation, telling everyone I knew that I was mentally incompetent, creating a narrative that would make it impossible for anyone to believe me if I tried to expose what they'd done. I stood there in the grocery store, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of people living ordinary lives, shopping carts squeaking, children asking for treats, the beep of checkout scanners, and felt like I was drowning. But this time, something different happened. This time, instead of falling apart, instead of doubting myself or wondering if maybe they were right about my mental state, I felt something I hadn't expected. Clarity. Perfect, crystalline clarity. This wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about family dynamics or generational differences or communication problems. This was about power, about control, about two people who were willing to destroy my reputation and mental health to cover up their own crimes. I screenshotted the video and the comments. Then I called Patricia Morrison from the produce section of Key Food. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Eleanor. I need to see you as soon as possible. They've just made this a whole lot easier to prove." I didn't post a rage-filled response. I didn't call them screaming. I didn't even drive over to confront them in person, though every muscle in my body wanted to. I sat quietly in my car in the grocery store parking lot, heart steady like the Brooklyn Bridge in a storm. Around me, people came and went with their shopping bags and their normal family problems, kids fighting in back seats, couples debating what to have for dinner, elderly women like me going about their daily lives. My silence was louder than their lies. My refusal to engage with their drama was more powerful than any argument I could have made. That moment proved to me something I'd been afraid to believe. I was no longer a shadow of the woman I used to be. I was unshakable. Patricia Morrison was furious when she saw the video. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, her professional composure cracking slightly. "They've just provided documentation of their intent to defraud you, and evidence that they've been planning this for months." Within a week, she'd filed papers to freeze the remaining assets in our joint accounts. Within 2 weeks, she'd initiated proceedings to recover what could be recovered from David's failed investments. It wasn't much, maybe $20,000 out of the nearly $200,000 that had disappeared, but it was something. More importantly, she'd documented everything. The forged signatures, the fake investment accounts, the systematic draining of my retirement funds, the conspiracy between David and Lila, all of it officially recorded and legally actionable. "What happens now?" I asked during our final meeting. "Now," she said, "you get to choose what your life looks like, without people who see you as a resource instead of a human being." A month later, I enrolled in a photography course in Lower Manhattan. The new school had a program specifically for older adults, and the instructor was a patient woman named Sarah, who'd spent 20 years as a commercial photographer before deciding to teach. Rediscovering the world through a lens was like learning to see again. I'd forgotten how beautiful shadows could be when they fell across brick walls in the afternoon sun. I'd forgotten how interesting strangers' faces were when they didn't know they were being watched. I'd forgotten that the world was full of moments worth capturing. We met twice a week in a bright studio near Union Square. My classmates were all different ages, different backgrounds, different stories. But we shared something important. We were all there because we wanted to learn something new. Because we believed we still had things to discover about ourselves. I reconnected with an old friend, Marie, who'd recently moved back to New York from Chicago after her husband died. She'd called me out of the blue one afternoon, having heard through mutual friends about my separation from David. "Eleanor? It's Marie Sullivan, Marie Kowalski from the old neighborhood." I almost cried just hearing her voice. Someone from my past who remembered me before I became defined by other people's needs and demands. We met for coffee at a small place in the village, the kind of cafe I'd never allowed myself time to enjoy when I was busy managing other people's lives. Marie looked older. Of course, we all did. But her eyes held the same warmth I remembered from when we'd been young mothers together, playing in Prospect Park while our children ran around the playground. "So," she said after we'd covered the basics, her move back to New York, her late husband's long illness, her adjustment to widowhood, "tell me what really happened with David." I told her everything, the whole story, from the first suspicious phone calls to the public humiliation on social media. She listened without interrupting, occasionally reaching across the table to squeeze my hand when the details got particularly painful. "Jesus, Eleanor," she said when I finished. "How did you stand it for so long?" I thought it was normal. I thought it was what marriage looked like after 40 years. I thought I was supposed to put everyone else's needs before my own. "Bullshit," she said, and hearing her curse made me laugh for the first time in months. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership. Family is supposed to be about love and respect, not financial exploitation. We started meeting regularly, exploring the city together like tourists in our own hometown, art galleries in Chelsea that I'd never had time to visit, small museums tucked away in neighborhoods I'd never explored, cafes and bookstores and parks where we could sit and talk about books we'd read, places we wanted to travel, dreams we'd put aside while we were busy being wives and mothers. My apartment began to transform too. With David gone, he'd moved in with some woman he'd met at a cryptocurrency conference. I could finally arrange things the way I liked them. New curtains in soft blue instead of the brown David had preferred. Plants everywhere, filling the windows with green life. Warm lighting that made everything gentle instead of harsh. I bought new clothes too. Not expensive designer things like Lila would have chosen, but clothes that made me feel like myself. Soft sweaters in colors that complemented my silver hair. Comfortable shoes that didn't hurt my arthritic feet. A winter coat in deep red that made me feel visible, vibrant, alive. Matthew visited often, sometimes bringing his girlfriend Rachel, a social worker who understood family dynamics better than most people. They never asked for anything. Never needed me to solve their problems or fund their mistakes. They came because they enjoyed my company and because they knew I enjoyed theirs. For the first time in decades, I felt seen, heard, and respected in my own home. "Grandma," Matthew said one evening as we were looking through my new photographs spread across the kitchen table, "you seem different, happier." "I feel different. I feel like myself again." "Were you not yourself before?" I thought about that for a long moment. I was who I thought I was supposed to be. The good wife. The supportive mother. The woman who never complained and never asked for too much. And now? Now, I'm just Eleanor. And Eleanor, it turns out, is someone worth knowing. Have you ever discovered who you really are underneath all the roles you've played for other people? Have you ever felt the relief of finally being yourself? 6 months have passed since that October morning when I said no for the first time. 6 months since I tore up that photograph and drew boundaries I thought I'd never have the courage to draw. I don't carry the weight of betrayal anymore. It's transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. I understand now that David and Lila's behavior was never really about me. It was about their own fears, their own inadequacies, their own inability to build the lives they wanted through honest work and genuine relationships. I understand that I spent 40 years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. Not because they were evil, but because they'd never learned how to see other people as anything more than sources of supply for their own needs. When I look back now, I don't see losses. I see liberation. Like the fiery sunsets over Brooklyn that I watch from my apartment window every evening, promising an end to one day and the beginning of another. Last week, David called me. The first time we'd spoken since the day I moved his belongings out of our house and changed the locks. His voice was different, smaller somehow, less certain. "Eleanor, it's David. I was wondering, could we talk? Maybe meet for coffee?" "What would we talk about, David?" "About us, about making things right. I know I made some mistakes with the investments, but I think if we could—" "David," I interrupted gently, "there is no us anymore. There hasn't been for a long time. But we're married. We have 40 years together. We have 40 years of history. That's not the same thing." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Are you happy? Living alone like this?" I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? It had been so long since anyone asked me that. So long since I'd asked myself that. "Yes," I said, and realized as I said it that it was completely true. "I am happy. I don't understand. I know you don't, and that's okay." After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine, a Riesling I'd discovered at a wine-tasting Marie and I had attended in the village. I sat by my window, watching the sun set over Brooklyn, watching the lights come on in the windows of homes where other families were sharing their evenings. Some of those families were probably happy and healthy. Others were probably struggling with their own versions of what I'd been through. But all of them were living their lives, making their choices, learning their lessons. I raised my glass to the window, to the city, to the life I still had ahead of me. "To Eleanor," I said out loud, feeling only slightly silly. "To the woman who finally learned to value herself." Lila hasn't contacted me at all since the day she found out I'd frozen our joint accounts. I heard through Matthew that she was angry, that she felt betrayed, that she was telling people I'd turned mean in my old age. Good. Let her be angry. Let her feel betrayed. Let her understand, even just a little bit, what it feels like to have someone you trust act against your interests. The legal proceedings are still ongoing. Patricia says we might recover more of the stolen money, but she warns me not to count on it. David spent most of it on investments that failed or never existed in the first place. The cryptocurrency fortune he'd promised turned out to be worth about $300. But I don't need the money back, not really. What I have left is enough for me to live comfortably, especially now that I'm not supporting two other adults who saw me as an endless source of funding for their poor choices. What I needed back was my dignity, my self-respect, my right to exist as a person rather than a resource. And those things, it turns out, were never really lost. They were just buried under years of fear and conditioning and mistaken beliefs about what love was supposed to look like. My lesson for you is simple. Never settle for silence when you deserve to be heard. Never accept disrespect in exchange for the illusion of love. Never let anyone convince you that your needs don't matter, or that questioning their behavior makes you difficult or ungrateful. You have value that exists independent of what you can provide for other people. You have worth that doesn't depend on how much you're willing to sacrifice or how many times you're willing to forgive behavior that hurts you. You deserve to be treated with kindness and respect by the people who claim to love you. If they can't or won't do that, then they don't really love you. They love what you do for them. And that's not the same thing at all. I'm 73 years old, and I'm just now learning to put myself first sometimes. Just now learning that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Just now understanding that real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make other people comfortable. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to choose respect over familiarity, truth over comfort, self-care over self-sacrifice. The city sounds different now when I listen to them from my window. Still busy, still alive, but somehow more welcoming. Like New York has opened its arms to include me in its story, instead of just letting me exist on its edges. Tonight I'm planning my first solo trip in 40 years. Nothing dramatic, just a long weekend in Boston to visit museums and walk through neighborhoods I've never seen. Marie wanted to come with me, but I told her I needed to do this alone. I need to prove to myself that I can be good company for myself, that I can enjoy my own thoughts and make my own decisions and trust my own instincts about what will make me happy. Tomorrow I'm meeting with a financial advisor, someone Patricia recommended who specializes in helping people rebuild their retirement security after financial abuse. It won't be the same as having the full nest egg I'd built over 30 years of careful saving, but it will be mine, under my control, managed according to my wishes and my risk tolerance and my timeline. Next week I'm starting a book club at the local library. Not joining one, starting one. I want to read books about women who reinvented themselves later in life, women who discovered strength they didn't know they had, women who chose themselves when the world told them they were supposed to choose everyone else first. The woman who woke up in that cold Brooklyn brownstone 6 months ago, waiting for other people to give her purpose and validation, is gone. Not dead, not destroyed, but transformed. She became someone who knows her own worth, someone who understands that being alone is different from being lonely, someone who can look in the mirror and feel proud of what she sees. Have you ever lived something like this? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? Have you ever discovered that the people who claimed to need you actually just needed what you could provide for them? But there's something else I need to tell you. Something that happened just 3 weeks ago that changed everything I thought I understood about family and forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. I was at the farmer's market in Union Square, buying fresh vegetables for the week. It was one of those perfect October mornings when the air is crisp but the sun is warm, when the whole city seems to shimmer with possibility. I was examining some beautiful heirloom tomatoes, thinking about making sauce from scratch, something I'd never had time for when I was cooking for a family that barely noticed what I put on their plates. "Grandma?" I turned around, and there was Lila. Not the angry, defensive daughter I'd last seen 8 months earlier, but someone who looked smaller, older, worn down by something I couldn't quite identify. Her designer clothes were replaced by simple jeans and a plain sweater. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail instead of the carefully styled waves she used to spend an hour achieving each morning. "Lila," I said, my voice steady though my heart was racing. "How are you?" We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the sounds of the market. Vendors calling out prices, children laughing, the rumble of traffic on the streets beyond. I could see her working up the courage to speak, the same way she used to when she was 7 years old and had broken something valuable. "I've been wanting to call you," she said finally. "For months." But I didn't know what to say. "You could start with the truth," I said. Not angry, not bitter, just matter of fact. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away this time. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. What we did to you, what I did to you, it was unforgivable." I waited. In the old days, I would have rushed to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, to make her feel better about her choices. But I'd learned the difference between empathy and enabling. I could feel compassion for her pain without taking responsibility for healing it. "Jay left me," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last month. Took the last of his gambling money and disappeared. Turns out he'd been seeing 3 other women, all of them funding his addiction. I lost my job because I'd been using company credit cards to transfer money to him. I'm living in a studio apartment in Queens that I can barely afford." She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "But that's not why I'm apologizing. I mean, it is partly why. Losing everything made me realize what I'd done to you, how I'd treated you like my personal ATM instead of my mother. But mostly I'm apologizing because Matthew made me understand something." "What's that?" "That you loved me unconditionally for 38 years, and I repaid that love by stealing from you and lying to you and treating you like you were stupid. That I spent my whole adult life taking advantage of your kindness, and when you finally stood up for yourself, I got angry at you instead of looking at my own behavior." A family with small children pushed past us, the kids excited about the fresh apple cider they'd just bought. Normal life continuing around us while my daughter and I stood at the crossroads of whether we could salvage anything from the wreckage of our relationship. "Matthew's been seeing a therapist," Lila continued, "for his own family trauma issues, and he suggested I do the same. I've been going twice a week for 3 months now." I nodded, still saying nothing. Let her fill the silence with truth instead of rushing to fill it with reassurance. "I understand now that what we did wasn't just about money. It was abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, the kind of systematic manipulation that destroys people. And I understand that I can't just say I'm sorry and expect everything to go back to the way it was." "No," I said quietly. "You can't." Her face crumpled for a moment, then she composed herself again. "I know. I know I might have lost you forever, but I had to try to tell you that I know what I did was wrong, that I know you didn't deserve it, that you were a good mother who deserved better than a daughter who saw you as a resource instead of a person." I looked at this woman, my daughter, this stranger, this person who'd caused me so much pain, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of possibility. "How's your therapy going?" I asked. She managed a small, sad smile. "Hard, really hard. I'm learning that I've been selfish and entitled my whole life, and that I learned how to manipulate people's love to get what I wanted, instead of learning how to build real relationships. My therapist says I have what she calls financial codependency. I've never learned how to support myself emotionally or financially without taking from other people." "And David?" Her expression darkened. "Dad's still the same, still convinced he's going to strike it rich with some new investment scheme. Last I heard, he was trying to get his new girlfriend to invest in some multi-level marketing thing. She's smart, though. She told him no." We walked slowly through the market together, not talking, just moving side by side through the crowds of people. I bought my tomatoes, some fresh bread, a small bouquet of sunflowers. Ordinary things for an ordinary Saturday morning, except nothing about this felt ordinary. Finally, as we reached the edge of the market, I stopped walking. Lila, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 8 months ago. I'm not going to go back to being the mother who puts everyone else's needs before her own. I'm not going to pretend that what happened didn't happen, or that saying you're sorry erases the years of lies and theft. I know, she said, and I could see that she meant it. I don't expect you to trust me. I don't expect you to let me back into your life like nothing happened. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. I see the woman I hurt, and I'm sorry for all of it. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, or the subtle entitlement I'd learned to recognize. But what I saw instead was something I'd never seen from her before. Genuine remorse. Not guilt over getting caught, not regret over the consequences she was facing, but actual sorrow for the pain she'd caused another person. I'm glad you're in therapy, I said finally. I'm glad you're learning to take responsibility for your choices. That's important work, and it's work you have to do for yourself, not to earn your way back into my good graces. I know that too. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small card, one of the photography prints I'd made in my class. It was a picture I'd taken in Prospect Park, a close-up of an old oak tree with new growth sprouting from what looked like a wounded branch. Light filtering through the leaves, casting intricate shadows on the bark. I took this a few weeks ago, I said, handing it to her. It reminded me that sometimes beautiful things can grow from damaged places, but only if the damage is acknowledged and the healing is real. She looked at the photograph for a long moment, then back at me. It's beautiful, Mom. I didn't know you were taking pictures again. There's a lot you don't know about me now. There's a lot I didn't know about myself until recently. She nodded, slipping the photograph carefully into her purse. Maybe. Maybe someday you could show me more of your pictures, if you want to. If you think there might be a place for me in your new life. Maybe, I said, and it was the most honest answer I could give. But it would have to be different, Lila. It would have to be built on respect and truth, not on my fear of losing you. I understand. As I watched her walk away toward the subway station, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not hope that we could go back to the way things used to be, but hope that maybe we could build something new. Something based on honesty instead of manipulation, respect instead of exploitation, genuine love instead of transactional relationships. But hope, I'd learned, was different from expectation. I could hope for healing without depending on it. I could leave the door open for reconciliation without compromising the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. That evening, I called Matthew to tell him about running into his mother at the farmer's market. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. He'd learned to ask good questions in the months since I'd started my journey toward independence. "Complicated," I said. "Hopeful but careful. She seemed different. But people can seem different when they want something." "What do you think she wants?" I thought about that for a moment, watching the sun set over Brooklyn from my apartment window. The same view I'd looked at for 20 years. But somehow it looked different now. More vibrant. More full of possibility. "I think she wants forgiveness," I said finally. "But I also think, for the first time, she might actually understand what forgiveness means. That it's not about pretending things never happened or going back to old patterns. That it's about making space for something new to grow." Are you going to give her a chance? I'm going to give us both a chance to see if she's really changed, or if this is just another manipulation. But Matthew, even if she has changed, even if she's doing the work and becoming a better person, that doesn't mean I have to go back to being the mother who sacrifices her own well-being for her daughter's comfort. Good, he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. You've worked too hard to become yourself to go back to being who everyone else wanted you to be. The next few months passed quietly. True to her word, Lila didn't push for more contact or try to rush the rebuilding of our relationship. She sent me a card on my birthday. Nothing elaborate or expensive, just a simple note that said, "Thinking of you today, and grateful for all the years you loved me even when I didn't deserve it." She called me once, about 6 weeks after our encounter at the farmer's market, to tell me she'd gotten a job at a nonprofit that helped people with gambling addiction. "Minimum wage," she said with a laugh that sounded more genuine than any laugh I'd heard from her in years. "But it feels good to be helping people instead of enabling destructive behavior." We started meeting for coffee once a month, always in public places, always for a limited time, always with clear boundaries about what we would and wouldn't discuss. She told me about her therapy, her new job, her growing understanding of how addiction, her codependency, Jay's gambling, had poisoned our family relationships for years. I told her about my photography, my book club, my friendship with Marie, the ways I was discovering who Eleanor Patterson really was when she wasn't defined by other people's needs. These conversations were stilted at first, formal in a way that conversations between mothers and daughters aren't supposed to be. But they were honest in a way our conversations had never been before. No hidden agendas, no manipulation, no one waiting for the other person to provide money or validation or unconditional forgiveness. Slowly, very slowly, I began to see glimpses of the daughter I'd always hoped Lila could become. Someone who asked questions because she was interested in the answers, not because she was looking for an opening to ask for something. Someone who talked about her problems without expecting me to solve them. Someone who seemed to understand that relationships require reciprocity, that love is not just about taking, but also about giving. But I was careful. I'd learned too much about protecting myself to be naive about the possibility of change. People can transform, but transformation takes time and consistent action, not just good intentions and therapy sessions. The real test came during the holidays. In our family, Christmas had always been a time of high stress and careful choreography. David managing his business disappointments by drinking too much and making grand pronouncements about next year's financial opportunities, Lila oscillating between depression over her latest romantic disaster and manic excitement about expensive gifts she couldn't afford, me cooking elaborately meals no one really appreciated, buying presents on credit, trying to create the perfect family celebration to mask the dysfunction underneath. This year was different. This year I made my own plans first. I booked a small cabin in the Catskills for Christmas week. Just me, a pile of books I'd been wanting to read, and my camera equipment. I told Matthew he and Rachel were welcome to join me for a day or two if they wanted, but that I was primarily looking forward to a quiet holiday focused on rest and reflection rather than performance and obligation. When Lila called in early December to ask about holiday plans, I told her about my cabin retreat. "Oh," she said, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "I was hoping. I understand if you don't want to spend Christmas together after everything that happened, but I was hoping maybe we could have dinner or something." "We can have dinner," I said. "But not Christmas Day. Christmas Day is for me this year." "Of course, I understand." And I think she did understand, in a way the old Lila never could have. She didn't argue or guilt trip or try to negotiate her way into my holiday plans. She accepted my boundaries without making me feel selfish for having them. We met for lunch the weekend before Christmas at a small restaurant in Park Slope, not far from Matthew's apartment. She brought me a gift, not expensive jewelry or clothes like in the old days, but a book of photography by women artists, with a note inside that read, "For the artist I never took time to see. Thank you for not giving up on yourself even when your family gave up on you." I gave her a framed photograph I'd taken in Central Park, a picture of two people sitting on a bench, their faces turned away from the camera, but their body language suggesting conversation and connection. "This is what I hope we can build," I said. "Something real." That holiday season wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I spent Christmas morning alone in the mountains, watching snow fall through tall pine trees, drinking coffee in my pajamas, reading poetry, and feeling more peaceful than I'd felt during any family celebration in decades. Matthew and Rachel joined me for Christmas evening, bringing Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine and stories from their work in the city. We played board games and looked through my recent photographs and talked about their plans for the new year. It was simple, relaxed, genuine, the opposite of every stressful holiday performance I'd orchestrated for so many years. When I came back to Brooklyn after New Year's, I felt different. Not just rested, but clear about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. Clear about what kinds of relationships I was willing to have and what kinds of behavior I was no longer willing to tolerate. I also felt clear about Lila. Over the past few months, I'd watched her making small but consistent changes. Paying for her own coffee when we met instead of assuming I'd pick up the check. Asking about my day and listening to the answers. Talking about her problems without expecting me to solve them or fund the solutions. Respecting my boundaries without making me feel guilty for having them. But more than that, I'd seen her beginning to take genuine interest in who I was as a person, rather than just who I was in relation to her needs. She asked thoughtful questions about my photography. She remembered details from our previous conversations. She seemed curious about my friendship with Marie, my book club, my travels. For the first time in 38 years, my daughter was getting to know me. It was scary, this gradual rebuilding. Part of me wanted to keep all the walls up, to protect myself from future disappointment. But another part of me recognized that healing sometimes requires taking carefully calculated risks. 3 months after Christmas, Lila asked if she could see more of my photography work. Not the casual request of someone making conversation, but the genuine interest of someone who'd been thinking about it for a while. I invited her to my apartment on a Saturday afternoon. She arrived with a small bouquet of flowers, daffodils, the first sign of spring, and her usual respectful attitude toward my space and my time. I'd prepared carefully for this visit, laying out prints from the past 8 months of my photography journey. Pictures of the city at different times of day, portraits of strangers who'd caught my eye, abstract studies of light and shadow, landscapes from my solo trips to Boston and the Catskills. Lila moved slowly through the collection, stopping frequently, asking questions about technique and timing and the stories behind particular images. Her questions were informed. She'd clearly been reading about photography, learning the vocabulary, trying to understand what I was actually doing rather than just offering generic praise. "This one," she said, stopping in front of a photograph I'd taken of an elderly woman feeding pigeons in Washington Square Park. The woman's face was weathered but peaceful, and the light had caught her in a moment of quiet joy. "This feels like you, like how you see the world." I looked at the picture with new eyes, seeing it through my daughter's perspective. "How so?" "Patient, kind. Looking for the beauty in ordinary moments, seeing dignity in people other people might overlook." It was the most perceptive thing she'd ever said about my work, about who I was as a person. For 40 years, she'd seen me only as the mother who served her needs. Now, for the first time, she was seeing me as Eleanor. "I've been thinking," she said as we sat in my kitchen afterward, drinking tea and eating cookies I'd baked that morning, "about all the ways I didn't really know you when I was growing up. I thought I did, but I only knew you as my mother, not as a person with your own interests and dreams and talents." "Most children see their parents that way," I said. "It's developmentally normal. But most children grow up and start seeing their parents as full human beings. I never did that. I kept seeing you as just my resource, my caretaker, my solution to whatever problem I was having." She paused, stirring her tea slowly. "I was talking to my therapist about it, and she helped me understand that I was afraid to see you as a person, because that would mean acknowledging that you had your own needs and limitations. It was easier to keep you as this all-giving mother figure than to deal with the reality that relationships require reciprocity. And now? Now I'm terrified that I waited too long, that I hurt you so badly, and took advantage of your love for so many years that even if I change, even if I become a better person, there might not be a place for me in your new life. I looked at this woman, my daughter, but also becoming someone I was just beginning to know, and felt a familiar stirring in my chest. Not the old compulsion to reassure her, to make her feel better regardless of the cost to myself, but something more complex. Compassion mixed with caution, love mixed with realistic expectations. Lila, I said carefully, I need you to understand that even if we rebuild our relationship, it will never go back to the way it was before. I will never again be the mother who puts your needs before my own well-being. I will never again fund your mistakes or enable your bad choices. I will never again accept disrespect or manipulation, even if it's dressed up as neediness or family obligation. She nodded, tears in her eyes, but her voice steady. I know. And I don't want it to go back to the way it was. The way it was before was harmful to both of us. It kept me from growing up, and it kept you from having your own life. So, what do you want? I want to know you, the real you, not just the version of you that existed to serve my needs. I want to learn about your photography, and your books, and your friends, and your thoughts about things that have nothing to do with me. I want us to have conversations where I listen as much as I talk, where I give as much as I receive. And I want to earn your respect back, not by promising to be different, but by actually being different, by showing up consistently as someone who sees you as a whole person, deserving of love and consideration. It wasn't a perfect moment. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sudden healing of all the wounds. But it was a real moment, an honest moment, the kind of moment I'd been hoping for without daring to expect it. We can try, I said finally, but slowly, with boundaries, with honesty about what's working and what isn't, with the understanding that rebuilding trust takes time and consistency, not just good intentions. I understand. And I thought she did understand. As much as anyone can understand a process they're just beginning to learn. That was 4 months ago. Since then, Lila and I have been carefully, slowly building something new. Something that doesn't look like a traditional mother-daughter relationship, but feels healthier and more authentic than anything we had before. She calls me once a week, not to ask for anything, but to check in, to tell me about her job, her therapy, her small apartment that she decorates with thrift store finds instead of expensive things she can't afford, to ask about my week, my photography projects, my upcoming travels with Marie. We meet for coffee or lunch every few weeks. Sometimes we talk about the past, the ways our old relationship hurt both of us, the patterns we're trying not to repeat. More often, we talk about the present, books we're reading, places we want to visit, observations about the city or the world or ourselves. She started dating someone new, a man named David, which gave us both a laugh, but a different David. This one is a teacher, a few years older than her, recently divorced. He knows about her past mistakes and her recovery process. He goes to Al-Anon meetings to understand how to be in a relationship with someone who's working on addiction and codependency issues. He's not exciting, she told me last month. He doesn't make grand promises or talk about get-rich-quick schemes. He just shows up consistently and treats me with respect and expects me to treat him the same way. How does that feel? I asked. Terrifying, she said with a laugh. And wonderful. Like maybe I can learn to be in a relationship based on reality instead of fantasy. I've started showing her more of my photography work, and she's become one of my most thoughtful critics. Not always complimentary, but always engaged, always asking questions that push me to think more deeply about what I'm trying to capture and why. Last month, she helped me set up an Instagram account to share my photographs with a wider audience. I was intimidated by social media, But she was patient in teaching me, respectful of my pace and my concerns about privacy. "You're talented, Mom," she said as we uploaded my first post, the photograph of the oak tree with new growth that I'd given her at the farmer's market. "People should see your work." Within a few weeks, I had several hundred followers, including other older women who were discovering or rediscovering artistic pursuits later in life. The comments were encouraging, supportive, full of stories from people who recognized something of their own journeys in my images. One woman wrote, "Thank you for showing us that it's never too late to bloom again." Another, "Your pictures remind me that beauty exists in ordinary moments if we just learn how to look for it." Reading these comments, I realized that my personal story of transformation had become something larger. My photographs weren't just documenting my own journey toward authenticity and self-respect. They were speaking to other people who were on similar journeys, who were learning to value themselves after years of putting others first. The success of my photography, small as it was, felt like validation of something I'd begun to understand during my months alone. I had value independent of what I could provide for other people. I had talents and perspectives worth sharing. I had something to offer the world that didn't depend on my willingness to sacrifice myself for others. But more than that, I realized that my painful experience with David and Lila, as traumatic as it had been, had taught me things about resilience and boundaries and self-worth that I never could have learned any other way. I wouldn't choose to go through it again. The betrayal, the financial abuse, the public humiliation, all of that was genuinely harmful and unnecessary. But having gone through it and survived it, having learned to stand up for myself and rebuild my life on my own terms, I had perspective and strength that I'd never possessed before. I became someone I could respect. 6 weeks ago, Matthew got engaged to Rachel. Last weekend was their engagement party, a small gathering in their Brooklyn apartment with close friends and family. Lila was there, along with her new boyfriend David. My former husband David was not invited, which felt like a clear statement about who Matthew considered his real family. Marie came as my guest, bringing her characteristic warmth and sharp wit to conversations about everything from city politics to the best places to find still affordable rent in Brooklyn. During the party, I found myself standing in Matthew's small kitchen, looking out at the living room where my grandson was celebrating his engagement surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him. Rachel was laughing at something Lila had said. Marie was deep in conversation with David about his work as a high school teacher. Matthew was moving between groups of guests, making sure everyone felt included and comfortable. These were my people now, not defined by biology or legal obligation, but by mutual respect and genuine affection. People who saw me as a whole person, who valued my thoughts and feelings, who enjoyed my company without expecting me to solve their problems or fund their mistakes. Lila appeared beside me, following my gaze out to the party. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. "Just thinking about how different this feels from the old family gatherings," I said. "Look how relaxed Matthew is. Look how genuine all the conversations seem." She nodded. "No one's performing. No one's hiding anything or waiting for the right moment to ask for money or approval. Are you okay with that? With relationships that don't revolve around drama or crisis?" She was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I'm learning to be okay with it. My therapist says I was addicted to chaos because it felt familiar. That calm, healthy relationships felt boring to me because I didn't understand that love could exist without crisis or neediness. And now I'm discovering that boring might actually be beautiful, that there's something wonderful about being around people who don't need me to be anyone other than who I actually am." Later that evening, as the party was winding down, Lila and I found ourselves alone together while I helped Matthew clean up. She was drying dishes while I washed, falling easily into the kind of domestic collaboration we'd never managed when she was living in my house and expecting me to serve her. "Mom," she said suddenly, "I need to tell you something." My hands paused in the soapy water. Over the past few months, I'd learned to listen carefully to her tone when she started conversations this way, trying to distinguish between genuine sharing and the beginning of a manipulation. This sounded like genuine sharing. What is it? I've been thinking about writing a letter to Dad. Not to try to reconcile or rebuild our relationship, but to take responsibility for my part in what happened to you. To tell him that what we did was wrong, and that I understand now why you had to protect yourself from us. I resumed washing the dishes, taking time to process what she'd said. What would you hope to accomplish with that letter? Honestly, I don't know if it would accomplish anything. He'll probably dismiss it or get angry or try to turn it around and make me the villain. But I think I need to send it anyway, for my own recovery process. My therapist says that making amends isn't about getting forgiveness or changing the other person. It's about taking full responsibility for your own actions. And you think you're ready to do that? I think I'm ready to try. I know I can't undo the harm I caused. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't erase the years of lies and theft and manipulation. But I also know that part of becoming a better person means acknowledging the full extent of how my behavior hurt the people I claimed to love. I handed her the last plate to dry, then turned to face her directly. Lila, I need you to understand something. Whether or not you write that letter, whether or not your father ever acknowledges what he did wrong, whether or not anyone else in our extended family ever understands what really happened, none of that affects my recovery or my well-being anymore. I know that. I mean, it really know it, not just intellectually know it. I spent so many years waiting for other people to validate my feelings or acknowledge my worth. I'm not waiting for that anymore. I know who I am, I know what I deserve, and I know what I'm willing to accept in my relationships. Your father's opinion of me, your extended family's understanding of our situation, even your complete transformation into the daughter I always hoped you could be, none of that is necessary for me to be happy and fulfilled. She was quiet for a long moment, then smiled. That might be the healthiest thing I've ever heard you say. It's taken me 73 years to learn it. Better late than never? Much better late than never. As I drove home that night through the familiar streets of Brooklyn, I reflected on the strange turns my life had taken over the past year and a half. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had also freed me. The family relationships that had collapsed under the weight of dishonesty had created space for new relationships based on authenticity and mutual respect. I thought about the woman I used to be, so eager to please, so afraid of being alone, so convinced that my value lay in what I could provide for other people. That woman had been sincere in her love, genuine in her desire to care for her family. But she had also been lost, subsumed in other people's needs and expectations. The woman I'd become was different. Stronger, certainly, but also softer in some ways. More able to love because more able to set boundaries, more able to give because less willing to be taken advantage of. More able to forgive because less dependent on other people's approval or validation. I wasn't bitter about the years I'd spent as that other woman. Those years had taught me valuable lessons about service and sacrifice and the deep satisfaction that comes from nurturing others. But they had also taught me that service without self-respect becomes servitude, that sacrifice without boundaries becomes self-destruction, that nurturing without reciprocity becomes enabling. Now, at 74, I was finally learning to balance love for others with love for myself. Learning that caring for my own needs didn't make me selfish, that expecting respect didn't make me difficult, that choosing my own happiness didn't make me a bad mother or wife or grandmother. These weren't lessons I'd expected to learn so late in life, but they were lessons worth learning at any age. Lessons that had transformed not just how I related to others, but how I related to myself. When I got home that night, I sat in my favorite chair by the window and opened a new notebook I'd been saving for a special occasion. I wanted to write down some of the insights I'd gained, not just for myself, but for other people who might be struggling with similar issues. I wrote about the difference between love and enabling. about the importance of boundaries in healthy relationships, about the courage it takes to choose respect over familiarity, truth over comfort, about the discovery that being alone is not the same as being lonely, that self-care is not the same as selfishness. I wrote about forgiveness, not as a requirement or an instant healing, but as a gradual process of releasing resentment for your own peace of mind. About how forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing harmful behavior, but rather refusing to let past hurts define your present happiness. I wrote about the surprising joy of discovering yourself at 73, of learning new skills and pursuing new interests and building new relationships based on who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. And I wrote about hope, not naive optimism or denial of hard realities, but the mature hope that comes from understanding that people can change, that relationships can heal, that it's never too late to choose a different path. As I wrote, I realized that my story wasn't unique. All over the world, women my age were learning similar lessons, making similar discoveries, finding similar courage to prioritize their own well-being after decades of putting everyone else first. The difference was that many of them were doing this work in isolation, without support or validation or the knowledge that their experiences were shared by countless others. I decided that night to expand my Instagram account beyond just photography. I wanted to share my story, to reach out to other women who might be struggling with family members who saw them as resources rather than people, who might be learning to set boundaries for the first time, who might be discovering their own worth after years of being valued only for what they could provide. Within a few weeks, my follower count had grown dramatically. Not just older women, but people of all ages who were learning to prioritize their own mental health, to recognize emotional manipulation, to understand the difference between love and exploitation. The messages I received were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. Stories of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, family members who disappeared when the money ran out, spouses who took credit for their partner's work, children who saw their parents as retirement plans rather than human beings. But also stories of transformation, of people finding the courage to say no, of relationships healing after honest conversation, of individuals discovering their own worth and building lives based on self-respect rather than self-sacrifice. One woman wrote, "Reading your story gave me the courage to change my bank passwords and stop funding my adult son's gambling addiction." Another, "I've been married for 35 years and just realized that my husband has never once asked me what I want for dinner. Thank you for showing me that small acts of disrespect add up to something much larger." A man from California. "After my wife died, my children immediately started pressuring me to sell the house and move in with one of them. Your story helped me realize that I don't owe them my independence just because I'm getting older." These responses confirmed what I'd begun to understand during my own recovery journey. Abuse doesn't always look like violence or screaming arguments. Sometimes it looks like constant small demands, like taking someone's contributions for granted, like dismissing their feelings or treating their boundaries as suggestions rather than requirements. Sometimes it looks like love, if you don't know what healthy love actually looks like. 1 year after starting my social media account, I was approached by a small publisher who wanted to turn my story into a book. Not a memoir exactly, but a guide for people learning to recognize and recover from family financial abuse, combined with my photography and practical advice for rebuilding life after betrayal. Writing the book took 8 months. It was harder than I expected, not because the writing itself was difficult, but because revisiting the emotional journey in such detail brought back feelings I thought I'd processed completely. But it was also healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. Organizing my experiences into a coherent narrative helped me see patterns I'd missed, understand connections I hadn't recognized, appreciate the full extent of my own growth and recovery. The book was published on a Tuesday in March, almost exactly 2 years after that first morning when I'd said no to David's demands for more money. Marie threw me a small launch party at her apartment, inviting my photography classmates, my book club members, Matthew and Rachel, and Lila and her David. As I looked around the room at these people who'd become my chosen family, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude, not just for their support and friendship, but for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The traumatic experience of discovering my family's betrayal had been genuinely painful. But it had also freed me to discover who I really was, underneath all the roles I'd played for other people. It had taught me to value myself, to set boundaries, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. I couldn't say I was grateful for the betrayal itself. It had been cruel and unnecessary and had caused genuine harm. But I was grateful for what I'd learned from it, for who I'd become in response to it, for the life I'd built on the other side of it. During the party, Lila pulled me aside and handed me a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked. "Just open it." Inside was a framed photograph. Not one of mine, but one she'd taken. A candid shot of me at Matthew's engagement party, laughing at something Marie had whispered in my ear. My hair was silver in the warm light, my face relaxed and genuinely happy. I looked like myself, but also like someone I was still getting to know. "When did you take this?" I asked. "That night at Matt's party. You were laughing with Marie, and I thought, this is who my mother really is. This is the woman I never bothered to see before." I looked at the photograph for a long moment, seeing myself through my daughter's eyes. Not the overburdened caretaker I'd been for so many years. Not the victim I'd briefly become, but the authentic, resilient, joyful woman I was still learning to be. "Thank you," I said, and meant it in more ways than she probably understood. "Thank you," she said back, "for not giving up on yourself, for showing me that it's possible to start over, to become a better person, to choose respect over familiarity, for being brave enough to save yourself, even when it meant losing the family you thought you had." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the remnants of the party, I sat in my favorite chair by the window and opened the book to a page I'd marked weeks earlier. It was a passage I'd written about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose, about the courage it takes to prioritize your own well-being, about the surprising gifts that can emerge from the worst experiences. I read my own words and felt proud of them, proud of the journey they represented, proud of the woman who'd found the strength to write them. Outside my window, Brooklyn was settling into evening. Lights were coming on in apartments where families were sharing dinner, where children were doing homework, where couples were talking about their days, where individuals were pursuing their own interests and dreams. Some of those families were probably healthy and supportive. Others were probably struggling with their own versions of the dysfunction I'd experienced. All of them were living their lives, making their choices, learning their lessons. I raised my cup of tea to the window, to the city, to the life I'd built for myself. "To Eleanor," I said, just as I had that first night after David's phone call. To the woman who learned to choose herself. But this time, the words felt different. Not hopeful or aspirational, but true. I had chosen myself. I had learned to value my own worth. I had built a life based on authenticity and self-respect. At 74, I was exactly who I was supposed to be. Have you ever lived something like this? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? Have you ever discovered that the people who claimed to need you actually just needed what you could provide for them? Please share your story in the comments below. Tell me about the moment you realized you deserved better, or the moment you're still waiting for. Tell me about the person in your life who's been making you feel small, and how you're working to feel big again. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships, or your own worth, or your own right to be treated with respect, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. It helps me stay brave enough to keep sharing these stories, and it helps these messages reach other people who might need to hear them. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for witnessing my pain and my transformation. Thank you for being part of my journey from silence to voice, from shadow to light. Remember, you are worth more than what you can provide for other people. You deserve love that doesn't require you to lose yourself. You deserve peace that doesn't come at the price of your dignity. And you're never too old to start choosing yourself first.